Hi, I'm Rob King. It's been a whole month since we first tried the Blue Moon clone, so here we are giving it another taste. This is still one of my favourite brews ever. It still has that smoothness, it still has that lovely sweet aroma, and gosh, cold, it goes down really well. This is Brew Day attempt number 1. We had all the equipment, all of the grains, all of the yeast, all of the hops ready to go, and then disaster struck.
No water chemistry because the mineral content is almost spot on.
Everything got off to a great start. Mashing in and that aroma was fantastic.
Sanitize. 20 minutes are up, so we now bring it up to 50 degrees. At this temperature, the water is a milky colour. Unfortunately, as I was going up to 50 degrees, the heating element cut out. Drowning my sorrows. Oddly refreshing and very hoppy. I think I like it more right now than when I first brewed it.
Of course you decide to work now. There is a lot to pack into this episode. A lot went on during this homebrew. And in this retrospective, we are going to look at the vital statistics, the schedule. We're going to sort of see the lessons learned, and that's pretty epic. In fact, I've broken down the lessons learned into 5 separate sections, starting with the recipe, also hardware. There was a lot going on there. Also the outcomes, the process, and of course the final conclusions and the results. So let's jump straight in to the schedule. This was around 7 weeks end to end, starting with 3 weeks in fermentation, 2 weeks in conditioning at 7 degrees, and then finally carbonation for 2 weeks at the very end. Those 2 weeks in secondary at 7 degrees centigrade really helped with the clarity. You can see there, or just how clear this one turned out. It was fantastic. During this homebrew, we of course experienced some equipment failure, and as a result of that, the brew house efficiency came down a little bit, coming in at 61% versus the target of 65%. Now this profile has worked really well for us for a long time, so it clearly was those problems with the equipment and the fact, rest in peace, the Aldi mulled wine warmer, it is a case that that's what brought that down. We also therefore missed a little bit on the original gravity and the final gravity, with the ABV coming in at 5.4% versus the original target of 5.5%. We were close, but just a little bit off. A small positive side effect of some of those problems though, the volume was great and we got nearly a full 8 litres out of this brew. Next, my favourite, the costs and the price. And for this one, I've really gone to town with some of the statistics, colour coding the 4 main ingredients. So water, 30%, that comes in at blue. Fermentables, 45% of the costs. And then hops, a mere tiny 2% of the overall cost. And yeast at 15% of the costs. Finally, we have a few miscellaneous other items, and this is priming, sugar, nutrient, etc. that we use throughout the homebrew. It really is interesting that water and fermentables are the 2 most significant costs for this one, accounting for almost 45% of all costs. And hops are a tiny cost. That is unusual. Hops usually are proportionally much more. Overall, this was a cheap one. It came in at a mere £16.94. Dividing that number by the full 8 litres, the costs come in great as well. So a cost per pint is a mere £1.21. Bargain! And these wonderful 330ml bottles that I've been drinking, they come in at a mere 70 pence. Wow, this one is definitely good value for money and a wonderful result. Good health. Moving on to our epic lessons learned. Lessons learned this time are broken down into recipe, equipment, process, outcomes and conclusions. So starting with that all important recipe. Lesson number 1 was the fine crush from the malt miller. Now a fine crush is more suitable for a brew in the bag, and this is actually the first time I've used it. It's difficult to be conclusive on a sample of 1, but it definitely did seem to work well. Lesson number 2 was the water chemistry, or to be more precise, the lack of a need for any additional water chemistry, because the Ashbeck water was almost perfect for a Blue Moon clone, and the Blue Moon really did have a very low and light mineral content profile. Lesson number 3 is crushing coriander seeds. Now I had lots of fun and games and quite a lot of mess trying to do this, but how much crush is enough was really the question that came here. I did just lightly crush them, but should I have really pulverized them a bit more? I'm not sure exactly what level of crush was being looked for. Moving on to hardware then, this was the brew that caused me all the problems. I actually did a brew day twice because one of them had to abort because the Aldi mulled wine warmer started playing up. I managed to get through this brew by the skin of my teeth simply by hitting the reset switch regularly throughout. Just keep it going. All of these factors combined to not quite hitting some of the targets, but at least I made it to the end, and for that I was relieved. At first I had wondered whether it was because we were trying to mash at a lower temperature. We'd never really mashed at that level before, but the problems persisted throughout the whole homebrew, so it really was, the whole thing was on its way out. Lesson number 5 then was, because this brew day was being a pain, we also had a leaky chiller. Now after the brew day, it really was just down to the fact that the connections had come a bit loose and I could hand tighten them back up. So that was the cause of the problem. But still, it was just, oh no, here we go. Another problem. Lesson number 6 are those wonderful big brew gloves, and they are wonderful for cleaning too. They're not a particularly expensive item, and in fact I'd originally purchased some barbecue gloves thinking they were quite similar, but they've been a struggle to keep clean, whereas these gloves are absolutely perfect and cheaper. Why didn't I do this first? Lesson number 7 is to do with the hop spider, and I've been working on this one for a while, which is it does take quite a long time to drain all of the wort out of the hop spider. However, if I simply move it to a jug, let it drain into the jug while I get on with other tasks, and then just bring those final bit of wort over into the final brew. That's all I needed to do. Simples. Lesson number 8 is the refractometer, and I still have that difference between the hydrometer and the refractometer when I take measurements. So I am still working through this and trust the hydrometer first. But I still want to use the refractometer more, especially in those early measurements where I have to take less wort out to take a measurement, and I have to wait less time for it to cool to room temperature for the measurement to happen. Refractometer is the way forward. I just need to get there. The next section of lessons comes under the category of process. Now this is something close to my heart. That's my day job, you see. And there are a few process related things that were quite interesting in this brew. Lesson number 9 then is the step mash, and this is the first time I've done a step mash, bringing the temperatures up to different rest levels throughout the whole mash process. Now the one thing that I really learned from this is just exactly how much extra time all those extra steps take, and actually the mash process was quite a lengthy process in this particular brew. Lesson number 10 then is sparge versus top up, and I didn't have enough room in the brew kettle to include all of the liquid, so I needed to include a top up at the end. But rather than top up, I actually sparged. I actually used that top up to actually rinse through the grains and to give us an extra chance for just that little bit extra sugar in the final wort. And staying on topic for just a little bit of extra sugar and volume in the final wort, I also used those gloves to squeeze the bag as much as I possibly could and get as much liquid out of those grains as possible. Rock on those new gloves. Lesson number 12 is definitely a follow the process lesson, and this is lactic acid. Now in the recipe it did call for 5 milliliters of lactic acid, and I think 5 milliliters of lactic acid would have been good enough, but it didn't seem that way at the time and I added a little extra. I don't think that's a problem, but certainly much lower pH than I was expecting. And finally in this section, lesson number 13, is I discovered that the chiller could also be a heater if you decided to turn on the hot tap instead of the cold tap. Oh. Now you never know when that could be useful in the future, but for this recipe it was definitely a mistake. Section number 4 then is outcomes, and lesson 14 is all about the final gravity. Now the final gravity came in a little lower than expected, so in effect it was just a touch drier, and this is the taste I was struggling to articulate when I was doing the evaluation, but I do think that small difference did make a difference to a drier end result. Lesson number 15 is wort left over. Now I think this was all down to those problems with the thermal cutoff and really not maintaining the boil at the appropriate level for quite long enough. Because we didn't keep the boil hot enough, we didn't have as much boil off. Because we didn't have enough boil off, we didn't hit the gravity we were looking for. There was a combination of factors that was all caused by those hardware problems. However, the end result still was fine, but we didn't hit the numbers. And this brings us to the conclusion of our lessons learned. And first off, rest in peace, the Aldi mulled wine warmer. It has been fantastic. For 30 quid, it's a winner. And I have now invested in some significantly upgraded hardware for some future brews. But that mulled wine warmer has been my friend for 2 years, and I am sorry to see it go. On the flip side, this is absolutely my favourite brew of 2024 so far. The double IPA and the Dunkel are in close second place, but this one is an outright winner. As evidenced by the fact that the keg lasted no time at all. If you haven't checked them out already, there's a video on the grain to glass recipe. There's some outtakes. There is a very interesting shootout between the clone and the real thing. And finally, congratulations, you've made it to the end of the retrospective. Good health, happy homebrewing, like and subscribe. Thank you very much.